and call this meeting to order. This is a public meeting session held for the purpose of public engagement on certain topics with the public, council, and staff. During a public information session, no member discusses or otherwise deals with any matter in any way that materially advances the business or decision-making of the council. I'd like to ask at this time that Mrs. Pearson, our clerk, operations clerk, give the land acknowledgement, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. The town of Petrolia acknowledges that this land on which we gather today is part of the ancestral land of the Chippewa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi peoples, referred to collectively as the Anishinaabe. The town of Petrolia is located on lands associated with the Huron Tract Treaty number 29 of 1827. We express gratitude for the land where we live, work, and play, and we are committed to working respectfully with the land and the Indigenous peoples who have called this land home.
Thank you, Mrs. Pearson. Now, the purpose of this meeting is to afford the public an opportunity to receive information relating to our 2024 budget and provide input to town staff and council. This meeting is specific to the 2024 draft budget. Any unrelated comments shall not be brought forward at this meeting. Public wishing to address council on another topic are most welcome, and this can be completed through the clerk's office for inclusion with the next council meeting agenda. And there is information at the back on the budget if you haven't already received a copy. At this time, I'd like to introduce the staff, or sorry, I'll introduce council. And on your right is Councillor Hyatt, Councillor Patel, Councillor Field, and then on your left would be Councillor O'Hara, Councillor Clark. And I'll ask Mrs. Pearson to introduce the staff present, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Joining us this evening is our Director of Operations, Mr. Mike Thompson, our Director of Parks, Recreation and Facilities, Mrs. Julie Bullock, our Director of Marketing, Arts and Communications, Mrs. Larissa Ellsworth, our Deputy Treasurer, Ms. Annette Strand, our Deputy Clerk, Ms. Jessica Smith, our CAO Treasurer, Mr. Rick Charlebois, and I'm Mandy Pearson, your Clerk Operations Clerk.
Thank you, Mrs. Pearson. At this time, I'd like to call upon Mr. Rick Charlebois, CAO Treasurer, to review the 2024 draft budget. Mr. Charlebois.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Could I have the presentation up, please? And you have my full presentation in this package. Thank you very much. So as the mayor said, this is our draft 2024 budget, the public session. So I'm the CEO and the treasurer, and we have Annette Strand, she's the deputy treasurer. So we've been spending the last 3 or 4 months putting this all together. Next slide, please. Here's what I'll cover. What I call the bottom line, just shows the bottom line rate changes for 2024 and our targets for 2025 and 2026. Then some financial background information, and then we'll go through each, our water system, our sewer system, and then all the other stuff for the town, and then a few closing remarks. Next slide, thank you. This is from a former U.S. Secretary of the Treasury. I find this very informative quote. That the budget is not just a collection of numbers, but the expression of our values and aspirations. I describe our plan for next year as our sort of short-term strategic plan, and that's the information behind the numbers that's most important. Okay, next slide, it's up there. So this is just some history going from 2019 actuals to 2023 actuals. The first set of numbers there along the top. That's our composite municipal property tax rate. That's the town, the lower tier, the county upper tier, and the education rate all put together. And then we've got the water and sewer rates. Next slide, please. So slide here, the bottom lines for 2024, For our lower tier, we're recommending a 1.5% increase. And then our target for 25 is 3% and 2026 of 2%. As you may be aware, the bank rate didn't go up last week. And hopefully the bank rate will start coming down. Inflation started to come down. And the Bank of Canada's target for inflation is 2 to 3%. So we're projecting that we'll be down there by 2025. So water, 3% for 2024, and then 3, and then 2, and then same for sewer, 3, 3, 2. The CPI for Ontario all items, it's called, for the past year, that's August 22 to August 23, was 3.8%. And the CPI for the full fiscal year, January to December, was 6.8%. Next slide, please. This slide here shows the capital grant approvals. So it's the approvals as opposed to how or when we spent the money. For example, in 2015, it's $16.5 million. 14 million of that was for the replacement of our wastewater treatment plant. We got a $14 million grant on about a $21 million capital project. In 2018, we got a $7 million grant to help us with a bunch of upgrades that we've implemented at our water treatment plant. And in 2022, we received about a $12 million federal provincial grant to replace our intake in Lake Huron and our water treatment plant in Brights Grove. Next slide, please. So now for the water. So the revenue, 2.5 million, that's a 3% rate increase, as we talked about just a few slides earlier. The operating costs for water, the main categories are the water treatment plant itself, $834,000. The booster station, $111,000. The admin, water admin, administration, collection and equipment, almost $300,000, and the water distribution just over $300,000. So that gives us a net operating surplus of $929,000. And then next we have our capital program. So we have operator recommended capital, and that's from Aqua. Aqua operates our water system for us. So at the water treatment plant, we've got $102,000, $8,000 at the Mandoman Reservoir. That's halfway between here and Brights Grove. And then our distribution system, which is in town, $33,000. Okay, for some more capital, Derby Holland, it's the top coat or the final coat for 2024. We did these streets in 2023 this past summer. And then the water intake, so a net of $533,000, $200,000 estimated expenditure, and then a bunch of grant money to offset that down to $533,000. Then we have our band shell, our 150th legacy project in Victoria Park. That's the water portion of that project. And then Petrolia line, water main upsizing. We've got a net zero there, estimated for 2024 of about $1 million. And then the bottom line, the transfer to the water reserve of just over $200,000. We don't anticipate any loans in 2024 for water. The water reserve at the end of 2022, the last external audit that we had, was 1.3 million. And we're building up the reserves for some of our, well, the main project is the intake. Even though we're getting about a $12 million grant, there's still over $4 million that the town of Petrolia has to come up with. Okay, Petrolia, yeah, there it is. We received a almost $12 million grant. Okay, next slide, please. Is the sewer. So the sewer revenue, 1.8 million, 1.9 million, 3% rate increase for 2024. The operating cost, we have storm sewers at 17,000. The sanitary sewers operating cost of 842,000. And then the wastewater treatment plant itself, which is 812,000. So that gives us a net operating surplus of 188,000. And then our capital for our wastewater, we've got Jacobs as the operator. So it's 128,000 for capital, 95,000 at the wastewater treatment plant, just 3,000 for the collection system, and then unforeseen capital of 30,000. Okay, and then the band shell, the sewer portion, 35,000. Derby Holland Streets, the top coat, sewer share, 31,000. The bottom line is a 6,000 requirement from the sewer reserve, and we don't anticipate any loans in the sewer reserve. And the sewer reserve, as of the end of last year, 2022, we had $37,000 in the reserve. Next slide, please. Okay, here's for every 100,000 worth of MPAC assessment. So it compares 2023. So for 100,000, petroleum portion was $984. The county 472, education 153 for a total of $1,609. And then with the proposed rate, so for our rate of 1.5%, that would increase for $100,000 would be just shy of 1,000. A net change of $15 net increase. For the county, we don't have the county rate, and it's usually out sort of, I'd say March timeframe is the target. And so we've assumed a 3.5%, as mentioned before. The inflation's running about 3.8 from August to August. So not sure what the county will do for sure. And then education, it's been zero for the last few years, mainly because the student population's been going down for at least the last 10 years or longer. And then the bottom line there, that's the composite rate. So for every 100,000 with our rate and the two assumptions, $32 increase per 100,000 or a 2% increase overall. And also the average MPAC assessment of a home in Petrolia, 193,000. So it's almost 200,000. So basically just double the rate. So the $32 for becomes 62 because the average is under 200,000. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. So now the town general, it's a lot more pieces to it. So the revenues, so the non-department Pacific revenues, $8,811,000. This is revenue that's not associated directly with one of our departments, like the Public Works or the VPP. So the proposed municipal tax rate increase of 1.5%, that gives us $6,393,000. And the government contributions, that's payment in lieu of taxes. One level of government can't charge another level of government taxes, but so it's called payment in lieu of taxes. It's basically the same as we do for any other property. And like the OPP building, the hospitals is different. They actually have a per head charge that we get. The Ontario Municipal Partnership Grant, $919,000. That's our main operating grant from the province and actually increased $39,000 from 2023. Other revenues, so the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, this is the formula-based grant. For next year, we just got this within the last week. It's going to be $668,000, so it's a decrease of $118,000 from 2023. And it's now based on current replacement values of our assets. Okay, actually I should update that slide. We're not waiting, we just got it in. Gas tax grant, or now called the Canada Community Building Fund grant, $190,000 for next year. Our tax arrears, interest and penalties, $45,000. Bank interest, as you know, bank interest is high right now relative to the past number of years. So we're estimating $200,000 there. The Blue Water Power dividends and interest, $240,000 for both. The town owns, I think it's 7.39% of Blue Water Power, so we get a share of their net profits, and we also have a promissory note with them. And then just some miscellaneous stuff for $16,000. So that gives us revenues for non-department Pacific of $8.9 million. And then we take off and put into reserves the gas tax reserve, $190,000, and the OSIF, Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund grant of $668,000. So we get a net revenue of almost $8 million. Now we're going to get into the various departments within the town. First one up is the library. So it's got a net deficit of $14,000, heritage $12,000, planning and development $128,000, and there's a lot of planning and development going on and will go on for at least the next 5-10 years. Cemetery, a net deficit of $61,000. General administration, $1.3 million. That includes all the council expenses, admin, staff salaries, insurance, legal cost, travel, IT support, Victoria Hall building cost, etc. And then we have on the next slide, yes, facilities maintenance for buildings, $131,000. Protective services, $1.3 million. And the majority of that cost is the OPP services of $1.1 million. Our joint fire department, our share, pardon me, is $339,000. We share the cost to operate our joint fire department with Enniskillen. We pay 60%. Enniskillen pays 40%. Public Works, $1,270,000. And that's for all the costs for public works, like their salaries, roadways, winter control, sanitary collection, and streetlights. The community center, which is operated by the Y, net deficit of $480,000. The arena, $259,000. Parks and Rec, $515,000. Community events, so the various events like Pizza Fest, etc. $156,000. The farmers market, $28,000. Marketing, $151,000. And then we have our loans. So $306,000 for 2024. And there's the various parts to that $306,000. And that gives us a total departmental expenditures of $6,452,000. Subtract that from the net revenue, the bottom there, so we get a $1.5 million operating surplus. Then on this slide here, so the working capital reserve, we'll get $1.5 million to help fund town general capital projects such as roads and reduce our need for loans. We don't anticipate any loans for the town general part of our operation in 2024. Victoria Playhouse for quite a few years now, I think like 8 or so. It's been totally self-funded and has a balance of $0. And if they have a surplus or deficit, it goes into the VPP reserve. Okay, the net operating then equals 0 because we transfer all the money into our working capital reserve, and we get a balanced budget for 2024. Pardon me. Next, we have all the town general capital. This is not the water, not the sewer. There's quite a few on the list here. I was just going to highlight a couple points, and if you have any questions, you can ask once I'm done this presentation, or you can always send me an email or Annette an email or give us a call. Glad to explain anything. On the next page, please, Annette. We just picked a few out to sort of highlight, otherwise we'd be here for quite a while. The second line down to the fourth line. So the community recreation project, so that's our new washrooms, change rooms at the community center. If you've been by the community center lately, you'll see a bunch of work going on. That's to get the soccer fields ready, all the drainage and stuff, and to put a lot of the underground infrastructure in. Then the next 2 lines after that is splash pad. That's the Kiwanis. They are borrowing 150,000 that council approved to put in the splash pad. Okay, the next page, please. Okay, on the fire equipment capital there. So this is just our share of the fire. So this is 60% of what the estimate is to buy whatever, like to get hazmat equipment, $12,000. So the total cost is 60. That's 20,000 if my math's correct, of which 6,000 Enniskillen would pay. And yeah, I was going to explain the one under the hazmat. So at the fire committee, which is a joint fire committee, both Enniskillen and Petrolia, it was decided and recommended to councils that for the washrooms are they're over 50 years old. They need to be replaced, and so both Enniskillen and Petrolia, we're going to put together $100,000 aside in a special reserve, and then in about 4 years we'll be able to afford to have the washrooms replaced at the fire hall. Next slide, please. It's going to highlight the library, sort of in the middle there. So the air conditioning at the library, 20,000, and you'll see a credit there going the other way. We've got a special donation a few years ago. It's quite a large donation to help replace capital equipment at the library. So that won't cost the town anything. And then if we look at the last one on that page, Bridgeview Park bridge, under the bridge, it's to try and put a trail under there so that people don't have to come back and cross the road. They can go under the bridge, and we're looking for a grant. This was on our budget for 23 as well. We didn't find a grant. We found one within the last month or two. So we're hoping if we can get this grant, we'll be able to progress that project. Okay, and the next slide. Yeah. The rehearsal hall. So that one will actually be totally funded from the VPP reserve, because the rehearsal hall is used by the VPP. Next slide, please. Roads. So we're doing Tank Street. There's a fair bit of work on Tank Street. That work won't start until we're basically cleared for all the work on the community center. We don't have 2 contractors in the same place. And that one will be covered off by gas tax rebate grants and the OSIF grant. The one under the OSIF grant, the sidewalk program. So we conducted a study, sidewalk connectivity study, and council approved the target about 125,000 a year to start improving our sidewalks and connecting our sidewalks network. Okay, and under Victoria Hall, the second line there, the HVAC air handlers, 165,000, and then 50% from the VPP reserve to cover half of that cost. Next slide, please. So the net capital program, so that's the gross capital program, which is just over $4 million. Take away any special funding grants, etc., of 1.8 million. So the net capital is $2.2 million. And our working capital reserve at the end of 2022 had just shy of $3 million. Next slide, please. So this is that summary slide, the bottom, what we call the bottom line slide. So for 2024, recommending 1.5% increase to our tax rate, targeting 3 and then 2% in the 2 out years. Water 332 and the same for sewer. And like I mentioned, the CPI for Ontario, August to August, when we started putting this together, was 3.8%. And for the calendar year of 2022, it was 6.8%. Next slide, please. This is the conclusions. So the town, we have over 363 million of assets at replace to the town, maintaining its level of service to its residents. There's a lot of capital assets in the water system for us to be able to provide safe drinking water to all our residents. And about half our water actually goes to Enniskillen, and they provide water to Danya-Femia and Doyle Springs. We've got a 10-year plan that helps us with all their planning. And the draft, actually I should say 2024, will be presented to council for approval on the 8th of January or the 15th of January. There's a report to council tonight to ask council to move it to the 15th of January. And if you put that last slide on, please. There we go. Budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. It's an interesting one. And that's all I have, Your Worship. So open for questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Charlebois. I think I'll ask, first of all, Mrs. Pearson, do we have any written requests that have come in?
Thank you, Your Worship. I received nothing in advance at the clerk's office.
Okay, thank you. So I'll ask those in attendance. Anyone wishing to address this council regarding the 2024 budget? While you're considering or thinking about it, I just want to mention again to thank Mr. Charlebois and his staff for coming in at 1.5% at a time when it's been very difficult. And yet at the same time, as you can see, we're still getting capital work done, and we're still moving ahead with sidewalks and all kinds of things that I'm very pleased with. If there's no one, I'll ask this, please come forward, state your name and your address, please.
My name's Hugh Dighton, and I'm at 536 First Ave. Two things caught my eye on this budget. One was Tank Street. We're gonna repave the whole thing. Have we ever thought about going back to the company that destroyed it and asking them for some money? Because mostly that's the big trucks coming in down to the shingle place, I guess it is. Now it's still called. I don't want an answer. I'm just asking that take a look at it, because they were the ones that really put a lot of miles on that road.
If I can, Mr. Dighton, I will have our CAO treasurer just maybe make a comment on that. Mr. Charlebois, go ahead.
Sure.
Definitely. Actually, you're definitely correct. That's big trucks do, I think they said one truck's equivalent to something like 5,000 cars because of the weight. That's why, I don't know, about 6 or 8 years ago, our council got no big trucks are supposed to come downtown Petrolia unless they're delivering stuff in Petrolia. So it got rid of a lot of the big trucks.
No, I knew that.
Yeah.
I understood it.
And on the Tank Street, what I heard was the base wasn't solid enough. I don't know if Mr. Thompson wanted to add something.
Go ahead, Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, that's correct. The base, there's not much of a base there at all.
But we're hoping that by putting a better base, less damage from these big trucks.
Understand.
Yeah.
My comment was the company that does all the work there uses that the most. I'm wondering why they wouldn't put some money into it to work with us to use that. Anyway, that's one question. The other one was the walkway we're going to put under the bridge down at the, well, it's just in the
Bridge
flats.
Department, yeah.
Understand they need a walkway under there, but how are we going to keep all the people from camping out down there? Because there's a lot of guys camp down there all summer long. with their tents and everything else. And that's just going to wash away every time there's a flood. So that's something to think about.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Dighton. Anyone else wishing to address this council regarding our budget? State your name and address, please.
Sherry Hamilton, 287 Evergreen Trail here in Petrolia. With all due respect, Mr. Mayor and councillors, I'm very concerned about the budget in general, with the strife going on, with our economy being weak, with so many families just struggling to make ends meet. I would just humbly ask all of you to really take another look if we can free up some of our surpluses to help our citizens weather the storm over the next year, to see how we come out in the far end. There's a lot of young couples coming to town who are buying new homes where they're increasing our tax base. We want them here, but we also have to help them hold on to those homes without losing them. So we have to try to do our best to reduce their overhead costs. So I just ask you to really consider those people new, those people retired, those people who are on a fixed income. So thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you for coming to address this meeting. Anyone else wishing to address this council regarding the budget? I will just mention to council, we're not here to debate it, but do you have any questions of anything that's been stated so far? If not, thank you everyone for coming, and I'll adjourn this meeting. Council will start at 7 o'clock for our regular meeting.